Peace and love, family. How is everyone doing tonight? Thank you all for joining us on another edition of the RAM Book Club, Resurgence of the African Mind, where we seek to liberate African minds by reading one unit of work at a time. I am your girl, Lily Lapoete Speaks, BKA Alima Njai. We are reading Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery by Dr. Naeem Akbar. We're going to be kicking it off with part two, Liberation from Mental Slavery. You can check out some of my poetry, as well as I will be updating the breakdowns of this book. The book is on my website, lilylapuetespeaks.com. Well, not the physical book family, but the links. So I will continue to update those links and have those ready for you. And if you would like to check out some of our previous reads, you can do so as well at lilylapuetespeaks.com. Thank you all for joining us, and we're going to let the panel introduce themselves.
Peace and love. This is your sister, Dr. Maat. Happy to be on the panel. Excited about continuing and to discuss this book. This is a powerful book. I always tell people is so short. It's only 68 pages, but it is packed with a lot of information that is vital to our mental liberation. So happy to be on the panel. Thank you so much for joining in. Peace and love, or tuning in. I'm sorry. Peace and love.
Peace and love. And this is Brother Kanuma, and I am excited to be on the panel, and I'm excited to be going through Dr. Naeem Akbar's book. And we are going through the next section, Liberation from Mental Slavery. Again, I cannot stress it enough. Every African must read this book. Every African must read Dr. Naeem Akbar's work, because it is what we need to take the next step and the next level of where we want to go for the future of us and for the future of our children.
I couldn't agree with you more, King. So, Queen, do you wanna spark it off?
Okay, so the beginning of the book, Baba, he was just saying that in order for us to break the chains, we have to, in essence, know who we are as a people. And he talks about how we are as human beings, and that we have a special place in nature, and that we have a level of self-consciousness that we have to be aware of. And I think that's something that we might see that's blooming now, is people's level of self-consciousness is heightened due to all of the things that are going on in the country. And so it is helping people to really understand their African self. And so I think that that's a good thing. And I liked how that correlated with the present time today.
Oh, absolutely. And Queen, I love how he was saying that, although we are a part of nature, he was saying that we have, a special place in nature, in that we're like the only species that's guided by our self-consciousness. Mm-hmm. And so, I love that he pointed that out. Oh, let me, what did I do to his mic? Oh, there we go.
He was talking about the limitations as human beings, and he's saying like our biggest limitation would be in our ignorance, you know what I'm saying, of our potential and what we can really be. And that's true. That's what has been hindering African Americans, and particularly for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's not really recognizing our full potential.
Absolutely. And part of that is our education system. The education system, mm-hmm. wherever the African is designed to do that, to keep us away from our African history, to keep us away from our African selves, to keep us away from our African minds. Because once we take our African minds back, we will build our African nation. Mm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then he goes on to talk about I'm trying to think, because I have so much highlighted, like it's ridiculous. Yeah. I got so much highlighted. And one thing that stuck out to me was culture. So at the bottom of page 29, he mentions culture, and he says that, we must acquire our consciousness of who we are and what we have been in order to operate in our full human capacity, as Sister Lily said. And she said, this is why cultures expend so much energy in creating the kind of environments and experiences which ensure that each generation of human beings will maintain the gains and acquire the consciousness which is necessary to preserve the human accomplishment. So when I read that, Sister Lily, I was thinking about just the importance of culture, and how it is culture that it's culture that your culture fosters or molds and shapes your consciousness. And so, if you're practicing a foreign culture, then you're going to be operating with a foreign or alien consciousness. And
Right.
so, I immediately thought about that. And we've talked about, the consequences of operating with alien consciousness when we read the book by Dr. Kobe Kambon, The African Personality in America.
Yeah.
All of the different mental disorders that, that we acquire as a result of operating, or as a result of acquiring an alien consciousness. So at the end, when he said that, I was just thinking about the importance of culture. So it is culture that shapes our psychology. And so it's definitely important that we reclaim and that we control and perpetuate our culture. And one way that we do that is by building institutions. So as you said, Brother Canoe, we
Yes.
have to build educational institutions. We
Yes.
have to build spiritual institutions. We
Yes.
have to make sure that our family institution is intact. And so that's how you perpetuate culture, right? Through
Right.
institutions.
Absolutely. Because if we learned what marriage is when we were children, then when we become adults, we know how to treat our spouses properly. If we
Mm-hmm.
learn how to be a culture when we're children, just like they do in Africa, they learn what culture is at a young age, and then we respond accordingly. But if we have a false culture, then we act falsely toward each other. We question whether or not that other black person is suspicious or not, because we've been raised in the American culture, which teaches hate and distrust.
Mm.
But we must reclaim our African culture, and reclaim marriage and education and all those different things that tie into culture.
Mm.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And so then he moves on to talk about the source of human power. And he said, it is our mental power, it's our consciousness, it's our awareness. And he says that whatever the form that consciousness may take will determine our state and circumstances as human beings. So immediately I thought
Mhm.
about the quote, as a man thinketh, so is he, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so he says, whatever the form your consciousness take will shape your state your state and circumstances as human beings. You know what I mean? So it's definitely important that we shape the consciousness of our children. You get what I'm saying?
Right.
So that we can function in our best interests.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Yeah. At the bottom of page 30, the second to the last paragraph, the bottom last sentence, they understand that ultimately the control of the people was in the control of their thinking, in the control of their minds, in the control of their consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
We That's why every African around the world's consciousness is waking up. And this book is part of the process of us taking our African minds back and rejecting the colonizer ways. It's just time that we just completely reject them, just like the other cultures do. The Chinese don't allow their children to just be educated completely by the colonizer.
Not at all.
Right. So we are in that process right now of taking back who we are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just want to. I'm gonna use your phrase, brother Canoe. You say I just want to plus. I want to plus one, which you said
Yeah.
about the ultimate control of a people was controlling their minds. So going back to Harriet Tubman when she said, "I could have freed hundreds of slaves, could
Say
have
it
freed
again.
hundreds of them if only they knew they were slaves." And
Say it
so
again.
yeah, so many of us, because they controlled our minds. I mean, a lot of us didn't want to rebel. You had rebellious ones, no doubt. But there
Right.
were some that said, "Look, I'm not leaving the plantation." Was out there like they were so mentally controlled. You know what I
And
mean? That they,
conditions.
yeah, and conditioned that
Yes.
they didn't want to leave. Well, I'm not even gonna say they didn't want to leave. It wasn't. Well, yeah, they didn't have a desire to leave.
And look, we'll be honest, all right. It is uncomfortable to admit that you have to change. It's uncomfortable. When you're young, only when you get older as immature do you realize, guess what? There's certain things in my life I need to change. Right? When you're
Mm-hmm.
young, you're like, I'm not changing that. I'm just who I am. But as you get older and more mature, you realize, guess what? Today, I'm not doing X, Y, and Z anymore. When you get to that certain age, just like being a parent, if you're a parent, there's certain things you tell your children, this is not going to happen in this house. And we do the same thing for ourselves as individuals. But now we're talking about doing it as an African people. It's like, guess what? We are no longer going to accept the colonizer ways, the colonizer ideas, the colonizer brainwashing. We are going to become African people and be the best African we people we possibly can be.
Mm.
It's the decision.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. Um, but he goes on to talk about, how the process of enslavement was not just,
Ooh,
uh,
yes.
yeah, the brute force, he says, of
Yeah.
overcoming people who were militarily weaker and forcing them to operate under your influence. And he said it wasn't simply the outcome of barbaric treatment of captives by assault, brutality, restricted movement, and activity. It says the process of human slavery is ultimately a psychological process.
Ooh,
And typically we don't think about that. When we think of slavery, we think of chattel slavery and people being hung and lynched, but we don't think about the psychological impact,
yes.
or the psychological aspect of slavery. Typically, people harp on the physical aspect of slavery, and so he says that the process of human slavery is ultimately a psychological process by which the mind of a people is gradually brought under the control of their captors, and they become imprisoned by the loss of consciousness, awareness of themselves. And that's why Sister Lily La
Ooh,
Poetic and myself decided to start this book club, and to title it, the resurgence, the
yes.
rebirth of the African mind.
Very
And
well.
so, we're saying, look, in order to shape your consciousness, then you got to acquire knowledge. How do you acquire knowledge? Well, one way to acquire knowledge is by reading books. And
Yes.
so that's why we founded, this book club, and
Mm.
named it the resurgence of the African mind. But anyway, I love how he talks about, here. He says that the disruption of our conscious building process and the imposition of an alien consciousness, which we talked about early today.
Yep.
Early on, he said it reduced Africans from being major builders and contributors to the world civilization. So you know how you had folks.
Mm,
So you had folks say things like, "Oh, you all keep walking around talking about you build the pyramids. Well, why aren't you building pyramids now? You keep telling people that you gave science and mathematics to the world. Why aren't you doing that now?" No, but we got to understand that there was a disruption in
yes.
our consciousness, and
Yes.
and that consciousness was replaced with an alien consciousness that really had us acquire. We've really acquired a number of mental disorders that have prevented us from doing the things that our great ancestors have been that they accomplished. You get what I'm saying? And so he talks
Mhm.
about
Absolutely.
that. And he talks about that here, and he says that we've just become totally dependent on other civilizations to guide for any guide.
Mm,
And so yep, he says again that we're notorious for self-destructive conduct. But
yes.
again, that's because we are operating with the alien consciousness.
Yes. 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 Yes.
All right. So did you all want to move into the process of making a slave and what happened?
Yes. Let us make slaves.
Go ahead and kick it off, Brother Canoe.
Okay. How did the slave makers accomplish this deadly feat? They engaged in a systematic process of dismantling any and all mechanisms that preserve the continuity of the African people. In other words, they banned the African drum. They banned your African language. They banned our African practices, and they replaced it with other practices that we're going to get into. Everything that was African, they banned. You couldn't even wear your hair as
Mm.
an African. That is how, for lack of a better word, that is how sadistic this system really is. It's just that sadistic. And look, I like what it says toward the bottom. The griots tried to remind the people of the difficult days which had already passed and how we had endured death from the environment and from the hands of our enemies of centuries past. So even the historians, the people that had it in their hearts, like as a matter of fact, like all of us right now discussing this in the panel, and the ones that are watching, we're the ones that want to share with the people. It's like, hey, look, we need to look to our past. Sankofa, look to the past, realize what we've done, and then move that forward to change the direction because we don't want to be in slavery anymore. We don't want to be in slavery anymore.
I mean, absolutely, absolutely. And then I also noticed. I don't know if you already said it when he said that they separated the
Yeah,
different, the related language groups and isolated people,
yeah,
from their familiar selves. So that was another thing. They took us away from folks who could speak our language. So
yeah,
our languages, got destroyed because
yeah.
of that. Hmm.
And again, I'll tie this into the continent of Africa. In certain places in Africa, the languages, you may speak an African language, but the other dominant language is French, or the other dominant language is another. colonizer language. It is not the African language. So even in today, we see the psychological slavery still in play that's affecting us.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And that's why Julius Malema, the brother
Yeah,
down in South Africa, he said, look,
yeah,
he was just saying, look, look, guys, we need to tear down these borders and just
yes,
realize that we're all Africans. And he
yes,
was saying that he said, we need to make a United States of Africa. He said, and we need to, he talked about the importance of adopting, at least he said, if you want to have your own languages in in your areas, he said, that's fine, but we need a language that is spoken throughout the continent of Africa.
yes,
Language is very important. Is extremely important. It's one of the major aspects of a culture. Your language.
absolutely.
You know,
And again, we see that in other language. We see that with the Chinese. We see that with the Korean. They held their language, but for the African, it was removed, and so we're in the process of taking that back again.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then also
And
in go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, brother.
no, go ahead. No, no, you're good. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and also in the process of slave making, he talked about how slave owners frequently snatched suckling infants from
Mhm.
their mother's breasts for fear of natural empathy. And he said that the goal was really, to create a race of orphans
Yes,
and to intentionally break down the family. So that was also, imperative in the slave making, or important in the slave making process. He also said, how black men were forced to watch their wives, daughters, and sisters and mothers raped by their owners. So, a part of
mhm,
making a slave, they basically emasculated and humiliated,
yeah,
the black man.
yeah,
And then during that process, I'm pretty sure that a lot of those women probably lost respect for those men, because they're like, you can't even protect me. So it says right here, he said, to contaminate the reciprocal respect, they had to contaminate the reciprocal respect that men and women have for each other in order to develop and maintain families. So can you imagine that, your father or your husband, or your brother looking at you being raped?
yeah,
You're looking at him like, you can't even protect me. You don't even have any power. So there was a loss of respect, for the black man as being
yeah,
the protector and provider for his women, his wives, and his children.
yes. And like you said, toward the bottom of that paragraph, it created a painful alienation between men and women. And even today, we see that. We see that division between men and women. The issue that the Caucasian men and women have with each other, the fight that they have, is not our fight. Feminism is false for the African woman because it's something that's made up to divide us. Again, like you said, I believe I forgot who you interviewed a few days ago. You said the entire East Coast was a breeding farm. So they literally bred blacks, and like you said, on a daily basis, took the children, separated the mothers from the fathers, raped both men and women, and degraded the family. And that's a tough thing to deal with. And then they also killed us, and they left us hanging in the trees to remind you, as an African, guess what? If you cross us, you'll be the next person hanging in the tree. So that's why it was so hard for our ancestors to, fight back.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Sister Lily, did you want to add anything, Queen?
I did not.
Okay. All right. Okay.
And I'll move down to the last second to the last paragraph on page 32. As we have discussed in the earlier parts of this volume, the personal character of the former slaves was distorted in ways even 130 years from illegal emancipation. We still carry the scars. The process of brutality, humiliation, just like we were just talking about, the deliberate ignorance continue to plague the personalities of American former slaves in such ways that it makes us our major enemies here at the turn of the century. So again, the psychological war was just as brutal as the physical warfare that was practiced upon us.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so then he moves into strategies to break the chains of slavery.
Ashe.
And he says that it's important to understand as a primary rule that the restoration of African consciousness is a process that must be accomplished primarily by African people. And so
Yes.
he said that, look, we got to mentally liberate ourselves. I know
Yeah.
that we might feel like we have white allies, and Asian allies, but he's saying that at the end of the day, this has to be, an endeavor that we undertake. It is
Yes.
us is up to us to break the chains of psychological slavery. He's saying you couldn't. Are you really trusting the descendants of the slave masters to initiate this or play a major role in eliminating the mental shackles? No. He said this is really a job that is up to us.
Absolutely. And again, this is part of why the Ram Book Club is so important, and for everyone to go back and listen to the archives of the different things that of the books that were covered, the different interviews that were covered, because we're in the process of breaking those chains. And when you listen to these things and you share these things with your children, and you share them with your friends, you're in the process of dismantling the mental shackles.
I just wonder how much of the psychological impact, that the psychological trauma that was placed upon our ancestors, how much of it was premeditated. You know what I mean? Is our assessment of it, was it premeditated on their part, or was it just kind of inherent to their nature? That's what I've always wondered. Like, were they that sophisticated in their thinking? You know what I mean? To where they were that advanced, thinking that if we do X, Y, and Z, it's going to result in this? Or was it just a part of their sadistic nature, and these are the results? I just don't think. I think it might be a part of both. It could be just
Yes.
me that always wondered that, but I
No,
just
no.
always wondered, like, how smart were they? Were they that smart, or it just kind of, par for the course?
I agree with you. It was a little bit of both because for the very wealthy, it was a strategy for of control. It was a complete strategy of control, and all they did was give dictation to the people that were below them, the generals, to keep control of the black people and to ship them across the seas to get them under control. So I think it's a little bit of both, and also it is part of the European nature. If you study the different Spanish War, the war between France and Germany, I mean France and England, and all the different wars there. They were fighting each other for hundreds and hundreds of years before they even discovered Africa. So it's part of their nature to, and we can ask the Indians about the different treaties that America has made with them, and all the different treaties that other countries have made that they've broken. As a matter of fact, didn't what's his name talk about that, Doctor? I forgot he talked about that. He said the exact same thing. He said, "Aren't if you believe the treaty from the colonizer, you realize that that treaty is just giving them time to build up resources to destroy you."
Yeah, he called it a ceasefire. He said treaters. He
Right.
said treaties are nothing but ceasefires.
Right. So they can build up and figure out a way to destroy you, and nothing has changed.
And Dr. Takao was just basically saying how, like, that's why it's important to study your history, because then you can use it as a predictor, right? We can predict behaviors, we can predict, things if we understand the history. And
Yeah.
Dr. Amos Wilson talks about that. He talked about that a lot in Falsification of African Consciousness.
Yeah.
That when we study history, it's a tool. It should be a tool that we use to empower ourselves. So we learn from it, and so that we know how to move. You get what I'm saying? So
Right.
absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So he talked about, let's move on. Let me see.
Okay.
So he talked about it being our job to break the chains of psychological slavery, and how let me see. He said how
Uh,
we cannot operate, with the expectation that our true liberation can
yeah.
only come with European American people when they change their mentality or when they change their minds.
Right.
And so, in trying to restore our consciousness, he's basically like, look, we shouldn't expend energy on trying to, make white people change. Like, it shouldn't be about that, because you got black folks are like, oh, I just want to educate white people. I want white people to understand us, and we
Mm,
understand them, and blah blah blah. And Dr. Naeem Akbar said, oh, no, no, no.
right.
He said, we shouldn't. He says black people cannot commit excessive energy to the effort to alter the attitudes and consciousness of white people with the assumption that this is the path to freedom. But you do have a lot of brothers and sisters. I don't even want to use it. I don't want to
Right.
quantify it, but you
Right.
do
Right.
have
Right.
brothers and sisters who believe that in order to dismantle this system, we have to change white people's minds or white people's mentality
Mm,
about us. And Dr. Naeem Akbar said, no, don't expend your energy doing that.
Like I said, that's a line to highlight, like the middle of the page 33. Black people, people to understand that our ultimate mental liberation must be guided by our independent action and activity. Highlight that if you have not highlighted that. We cannot operate with the expectation that our true liberation can come when European American people change their mentality. Again, we can say the same thing about Africa. We cannot operate on the expectation that our true liberation will come when the Europeans in Africa change their mentality. We can't wait for them. The elimination of white racism is not a necessary prerequisite for the liberation of the African mind. In other words, we have to make a personal decision. And a personal decision ends up being a group decision of guess what? We are going to take responsibility and we're not having this anymore. That's for real, for real.
Absolutely. Sister Alima, did you want to add anything to that, Queen?
No.
All right.
Okay.
All right. So it says, as we have discussed above, the primary objective to freeing the Black mind is to change the consciousness. And he said that it's not a simple or brief process. And I'm glad he
Yes.
pointed that out.
Yes.
Typically, some people think that if they read a book, they're conscious. You know,
Right.
if they read a book, oh, I'm conscious. If I got my African mind back. And I remember Dr. Amos Wilson in one of his lectures, he was talking about Carter G. Woodson. And he said that in Carter G. Woodson's writings, Carter G. Woodson stated that it took him nearly, I think, 30 to 40 years to reprogram his mind. And
Yes.
so, what we need to understand is that in liberating ourselves mentally, that this is a journey. This is not going to be an overnight process. This is something that we have to, work at daily.
Yes.
And I love how Dr. Naeem Akbar said, and we may not even see the fruits of this, right? He says that we must understand that generations of unborn African people might be the true beneficiaries of this process. So, I'm
Mhm.
glad that he drove home, in those few sentences that, mental liberation is a process. It's a journey. It's not an overnight thing. It's not something that happens just because you read, a book or
Yes.
because you want to do it within a certain time span. It's definitely a journey and definitely a process.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so moving on to the next subsection, knowledge of self,
Knowledge
he
of
says
self.
that he says that in order to change the African consciousness, we must change the information that is in the African mind, right? So our consciousness is shaped and formed by the information that we receive. And so if we want to change our consciousness, then we have to change the type of information, right? The information that's shaping our consciousness. And
Yes.
so he says that we cannot equate the awareness with information. Through information is the roadmap to awareness and is a critical part of the process. And so then he goes on to talk about how Europeans are fed, they're fed a daily diet of their greatness and all of the different things that they
Mhm.
accomplish. He says,
Mhm.
even when you go to places like Washington, D.C., you have
Mhm.
monuments everywhere that sing the praises and accomplishments of European people, right? And
Yes.
so they develop a consciousness or a consciousness that is a consciousness of superiority, right? Of
Yes.
and of accomplishment. And so we have to understand that when we're not fed a daily diet of our accomplishments and our greatness, then we tend to acquire what he talked about in part one, a sense of inferiority.
Yes.
Yeah. So he encourages us to read the books by some of our great ancestors, W.E.B. Du Bois, J.A. Rogers, Carter G. Woodson, Martin Delany, George G. James. He says hundreds of others. He also mentions Chancellor Williams, John G. Jackson, John
Yes.
Henry Clark, Dr. Yosef bin Jacobin,
Document.
yeah,
Yes.
Shank Anti Jope, and I got it right,
Yes.
Sister Alima,
Joke.
Jope, because
Joke.
she always corrects me because I'm like Diop. I used to say Diop,
Yes. Yes.
and
Yes.
Exactly.
she's like, no, 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 it's not Diop, it's Jope. And I said, okay.
And
So
I just want to plus one what you're saying.
mhm,
Um, we spent 12 years in colonizer education. 12 years of our life being taught by the colonizers, learning the colonizer ways, learning the colonizer holidays, learning the colonizer, like it says here, celebrating all their things. So now we have to literally counteract all of those things. And even he goes on further to where he talks about our own children. Therefore, black children need to know about black accomplishments throughout history and throughout the world. Uh, just like this video on YouTube. This video you can show to your children, or you can show them different things that show the accomplishments of black people. Um, like you said, the different books that there are. I'm trying. Oh, there you go. That's what I was thinking of. I showed my children Anthony Browder's book and his video, Nile Civil, Nile Valley Civilization's contribution to the world. I showed them that when they were like 10 and 11 years old, and I have them watch it every other year. So we literally have to counteract all the things we've been brainwashed with and reclaim our African mind again.
And
Facts.
just yeah, yeah, and just to name some other tools, I know that brother Black Panther, the husband sister of Lily, the husband of Sister Lily, he wrote a book
Okay.
called Aaron Learns About Africa.
Oh,
And I believe the book is available on lililapoetespeaks.com. So
okay.
that's another tool that that we can use, to learn about Africa. That's one tool. There are books by a sister named Akia, I think her name is Akua Agassi. She has a number of books. A book on Marcus Garvey, a book about Madam C.J. Walker, a book about Queen and Zenga. So she has a book series. Also, I'm going to plug the Meltrek program. You can go to Google, type
Yeah.
in Meltrek, Meltrek. So the Meltrek program teaches children about our history and our culture. You also have Tell Me Who I Am, which was an animated film produced by brother Daryl Grayson. His company is called Kid Positive, and they're in the process of producing like a 12, episode series that is
Oh, wow.
dedicated to exploring our history. And so there are a number of tools out there that we can use, in our households to teach our babies, to teach our children about our history, our culture, and our accomplishments.
And maybe we can share some of those things, at the bottom of the links or after this video is done, so that other people can to see those different resources, the different books. Because
Absolutely.
again, we think about what our children do on a daily basis. They watch Sesame Street every day, right?
Exactly.
Right. So we have to counteract all those things and give them their African mind back. I mean, uh, I'll give the example what I told share with people about my son. I said the first day I heard him repeat a commercial off the TV, that's when I started getting him DVDs for the alphabet. I had him watch it 3 times a day, and he knew his alphabet before anything. I wasn't playing. I was not playing. So your children, just like again, Dr. Amos Wilson said, he said your children are geniuses. The only thing they need is for the teacher to give them what they and don't put limitations on them, because your children can learn to add, subtract, and all those different things because it's already in them. You're just, like it says, Uduko, you're just pulling out what's already in them. So all these different resources we'll try to share with everyone so that you can educate ourselves as adults and also educate our children and our teenagers.
Absolutely. And I love how he drives home this, because a lot of people say, oh, it's just history. I don't want to learn about history. What's
Right.
the point? And he says it is not just a story of history, but a story of science,
Yeah.
and that every people have contributed to the progress of science, and no one person or one people has a monopoly on the accomplishments of science and technology. He said it's important to understand that all people, it says that the resources of the earth are available to all of the inhabitants, and the claims of superior knowledge, technology, and circumstance is an accident of information and consciousness, and not a divine right given to some people and
Hmm.
systematically kept away from others. He says the information about how Black people came to be in the state that we find ourselves is an important story to be told, so that future generations will understand that it was not a genetic deficiency and or divine decree which created our circumstances, but the advantage of human oppression that
Yeah.
created the privilege of the few and the poverty of the many. So it's important that we tell our babies our history so they
Yeah.
can understand where we are and how we got here and what we need to do to advance as a collective.
Mm, mm, mm.
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and I always tell my students over at Morgan that it's important to give, we gotta put models of excellence in front of
Yes.
our babies
Yes.
because children emulate what they see. And so if we want them to be great, then we have to show them greatness. So it's important to continually put models of excellence in front of our children.
Mm,
Yeah.
that is
So
real, real.
yeah, and so he says, from the cradle to the grave, we must submerge ourselves in information about ourselves from books, pictures, or whatever source that will bring messages in our minds. Each bit of information helps to mold the keys which will open the chains that
Mm,
remain on our minds.
mm, mm, mm. Again, we can read that paragraph again. We must submerge ourselves in this because guess what? When we were born, we were submerged into the American society. You're submerged into those things automatically. So now we're just reversing that process, literally. Wow. 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 Wow.
So our last section was celebration time.
Yes.
And you know, um, this was a pretty good section. And I love how he drove home that we should learn to comfortably celebrate ourselves.
Yes.
Put your red, black, and green flag outside of your house and on your flagpole.
Yes.
He says that self-celebration is a form of healing and is also a central part in maintaining a free mind.
Yes.
And he says, but it becomes even more fundamental in freeing a captive mind. And so we need to begin to celebrate ourselves. And he pointed out some holidays, and he said, I know Kwanzaa isn't, an actual African holiday, in the sense that, but he said, look, he said, if you want to celebrate it, celebrate anything that brings pride and dignity to our culture. Celebrating, Martin Luther King's birthday. I don't know, Marcus Garvey, Black August,
Yeah.
the red, black, and green flag. I know that they unveiled the red, black, and green flag in 1920.
Yeah.
So this August, this is the first, I guess, centennial. It'll be a centennial celebration of the unveiling of the red, black, and green flag. But celebrate ourselves. Black August, Kwanzaa. I'm trying to think what else. People go out and celebrate Juneteenth or whatever.
Yeah.
Celebrate ourselves. Harriet Tubman's birthday. If you want
Yeah.
to celebrate, Ida B. Wells' birthday, Nat Turner, whatever. We should be able to comfortably celebrate ourselves. And he also talks about how it becomes healing. And
Hmm.
and I love how he points out that even in mythology, so he
Oh,
talks about,
say
like,
it.
yeah, he
Say
said, even
it.
with, where are we looking at? He talks about mythology. I'm
Yeah,
looking
page
for the
30. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he said, so even with mythology, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be an actual event that we're celebrating. It
Yes.
could be mythology, but something that communicates to our people, something about our greatness or our potential greatness. And so he says self-celebration is very imperative. Go ahead, brother.
Oh no, I'm plus wanting what you're saying. Again, and this comes in where Lillian Lapointe is a specialist. Her poetry by default is African poetry, and it builds and it lifts us up. The holidays that we celebrate, even if you don't, I'll admit to myself, I didn't want to celebrate Kwanzaa at first because I was like, what is Kwanzaa anyway? Until I researched it and realized how much work was put in to celebrate that time. What African celebrations are going on in your area? Because there's something going on. Even in different places, they have a cultural celebration of Africa. Go to those things and see the different foods that you've eaten. Wear the African clothes. Again, like you said, put up the flag. Put up a map of Africa. Who are your favorite African authors? Put them up so your children will know who they are. Who are your favorite African cartoons? There's a shirt I got from my daughter by an African artist, and it's so amazing that she just fell in love with it. So all those different things that we can do to celebrate our Africanness, and
Absolutely.
like he says at the bottom of page 37, and we need to highlight that 3 times. We must unashamedly display our images and great ancestral figures throughout our environments. Plain and simple.
That's right. So our figurines, our flags,
Yeah.
portraits of our ancestors,
Mm.
These should be, in our households and, in our communities. Let's display them, and let's unashamedly, he says, unashamedly,
Unashamedly,
yeah,
yes.
display our images and our great ancestral figures throughout our environments. Absolutely.
Right. And again, as he says on the next page, on page 38, we should celebrate our heritage and those people who have distinguished themselves as African people of greatness. So again, we celebrate greatness, whatever that greatness is within our African selves. That's a tough thing. Like he says right on there, our churches should show pictures of great women and men of faith who endured to make a way for young Black people. It's literally encouraging our young children to be great, and it's also encouraging us to be greater than what we are. Again, the Ram Book Club is here to build the African mind back again and to take back who and what we truly are.
And show the babies our greatness and it all of its various stages. We're not just basketball
Yes.
players. We're
Ooh,
not just actresses. We're
say it
not just
again.
cosmetologists. Like, we're scientists. We're mathematicians. We're historians. We're archaeological geniuses. Like, let the babies know about this so that they can strive for more. Because you never know what your kid is into. Your son might like art. He might not like basketball. Maybe show
Yes.
him some amazing Black artists before him that can inspire him. That's how we inspire greatness.
Hmm.
Look, me,
Yes.
me and Kadeem, we over here like, cause she's so right. She's so right, man. Like, we can't just keep showing them Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant,
No.
and there's
No.
nothing wrong with showing your
Right.
children athletes. But she's right. We're much more than athletes and entertainers. We're
Yes.
so much more than that. We're
And
so
they're
much more than that.
yeah, they're great thinkers. Just again, we'll go back to Dr. Mott. All the interviews that you are doing, all the interviews that you've lined up, all the ones that you've done before, that everyone can go back to and listen to. The great Black thinkers, the great African thinkers, the people that want to see us grow and become our our greatest selves. And I'll have to drop this note and a shout out to the African woman, the African mothers, both of you, all the things that you're doing for your children, that you've done for your children, the seeds that you're planting that I have no doubt will grow. That being an African mother, that's for real, for real. That is that
Mhm.
that's I give both of you the highest praise, and all African men the highest praise for the things that you do.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you
Hmm.
so much, King.
Hmm.
I appreciate your words, brother. I
Hmm.
appreciate your words. And look, I was up here thinking about when we were talking about when Sister Lily talked about like
Yeah.
scientists and archaeologists. My mind went to a speech by Marcus Garvey. I'm looking
Okay.
at it from my phone, but
Okay.
in the speech he says there is no height to which you cannot climb without the active intelligence of your own mind. Mind creates, and as much as we desire in nature we can have through the creation of our own minds. He said, and today, being scientifically the weaker race, you shall treat others only as they treat you. But in your homes and everywhere possible, you must teach the higher development of science to your children and make sure, he said, and make sure that we have a race of scientists par excellence.
Hmm.
So, the Honorable Marcus Garvey, talked about the importance of, cultivating, scientists. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I just wanted to add on to what you all said. But,
Absolutely.
so we have discussed the first half of part two of
Okay.
breaking the chains of psychological slavery. So this actually concludes our discussion for today. Sister
Okay.
Lily, do you have any closing words, Queen?
Another good build is as usual, family. Hope that you guys take the jewels that have been found within the reading and from the panel and apply it to our lives. Because at the end of the day, it was the point of knowledge without application. And I'm just
Mm,
glad for everyone to join us tonight. And I've enjoyed myself as always. And everyone have a great week.
Brother
yes.
Kanim. Brother Kanim, any closing words, brother?
I just want to again plus one what she said. Hey, guess what? Put it into action. What are you going to do today? What video are you going to watch? What video are you going to share? What product are you going to buy for your children? What product are you going to buy for your grandchildren? What are you going to do today to help encourage your children to be the greatest persons that they can be, to be the greatest Africans they can be. So yes, absolutely, it's great.
Well, I want a plus two because I want a plus one what she said and plus one what you said, brother Kadoom. But yes, family. Yes, family. I mean, I feel like they both hit the hammer on the nail. We have to apply this knowledge. There's no sense
Mhm.
in acquiring knowledge if you're not going to apply it. And that's what intelligence is, Sister Lily. When you Google the definition of intelligence, it's the application of
That's right.
knowledge. So you can't be
Yeah.
walking around with all of this knowledge and calling yourself an intelligent person if you're not applying the knowledge that you possess. And so that's what it's all about. And that's why we do what we do. Thank you so much for joining us, family. I see more people are coming in. Family, we start at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And people are trickling in. I see them joining in on the chat, joining in
You
on
know how they
Facebook.
do, sis.
I
They're
know.
always late. What is
Always.
that? 2 years we've been doing this now at 7 o'clock for 2 years. Jesus.
Coming in at 7:46. Family, please join us at every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay, we start at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So come on in and join us. You don't necessarily need the book or have read the chapter to join it, even though that would be great. But if you don't have the book or if you don't, haven't read it, still join in because we disseminate a lot of powerful information. Be sure to visit lililapoetespeaks.com.
Yes.
Check out her blogs, check out her products. Also, check out her YouTube channel, Lili La Poete Speaks. Okay, she has a powerful YouTube channel with a lot of good information. So check that out. Please come on over here, support my channel.
Yes.
Yeah.
On Monday, not on tomorrow, I have the CEO of a black bank, Brother Ken.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's coming
Economics.
on. Yes,
Economics.
In there.
yeah, so he's coming on. He's coming on tomorrow at 8 p.m. On Tuesday, I have Dr. Charles Finch coming on at 8 p.m.
Yes.
And on Wednesday,
Shay.
and on Wednesday,
That's a must. Yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Oh, he's gonna go in. We're gonna be talking about science. We're gonna be talking about evolution. We're gonna beat up the creation story in the Bible. So it's gonna be deep. So he's coming
Uh-oh.
on. I know. He's coming on, and then
I'll be there.
oh yeah. And then Dr. Patricia Newton, she's coming on Wednesday. And for those who don't know her, she's like a protege of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. She's also a psychiatrist. And so she'll be joining me on Wednesday to talk about, the psychology of self-hate and what we need to do to overcome it. So family, definitely join me on this channel. Thank you for joining us tonight. We will see you next week. Peace and love.
Peace and love.